The Detroit Lions. That was a good discussion, by the way. Detroit Lions, NFC North. We gave them a good grade as well. We gave them an A, even though it could have been an A++.
Oh, wow.
But they took DeAndre Swift in the second round, the running back. But when you look at what they brought in, Jeffrey Okudah, the number 3 pick, we love that man coverage corner, and that's their scheme. So love that as a fit. Julian Okwara, we had as a first round value, an edge defender. I put as my comp Jamie Collins, so he could learn from Jamie Collins right there in Detroit as an edge, perhaps linebacker hybrid. I actually wrote that Belichick Tree will love him as Jamie Collins. So that worked out pretty well. And then Jonah Jackson, probably the best pass protecting guard in the draft in the third. And I loved Logan Stenberg, the other guard that they got from Kentucky. They may have had gotten two starting guards in this draft as well. That's an underrated, way to build a team in rounds 3 and 4. What'd you think of the Lions?
I think this wasn't an exciting draft, but I think it was a good one. They didn't have the decision to make because Chase Young was taking it too. But I think even if Chase Young had been there, Jeffrey Okudah was the right move because, look, it's kind of like the Vikings. It's damage limitation. It's probably not upgrading you from a year ago in terms of Darius Slay to Jeffrey Okudah, but you don't have Darius Slay anymore. So you now have a hole that needs filling. So you fill it, and you fill it with one of the most valuable positions in the NFL. So I think Okudah was the right move, whether they had a choice of Chase Young or not. I think given that he wasn't there, it was a no-brainer. Okay, they drafted a running back, fine. But I think down the line, you get some solid guys that can start. They a couple of late round interior defenders as well. Jonah Jackson is the one where it kind of hinges on our evaluation of him, right? We think he's one of the most pro-ready, pass-protecting guards in the NFL, could immediately step in and be a quality starter. If you snag one of those midway through the third round, you're doing well.
Yeah, and I think the NFL did have this perception of there was 5 or 6 running backs in the NFL in this draft, right? And it goes down to, you brought this point up last year too, like we didn't think that the combine mattered a ton, but there's definitely like a cutoff point, right? Like you can't have a 4.8 corner. There's a point where you are too slow. There is a point where the running back isn't talented enough to be a productive. It's not like you could take Johnny High School and put him in there behind an offensive line and average 5 per game. Maybe you could. So I think the NFL did have this perceived tier of DeAndre Swift and Edwards-Helaire and J.K. Dobbins and a couple other guys, right, where they wanted to make sure they got one. I find it interesting that they just drafted Jaylen Johnson in the second round 2 years ago, and he's been pretty solid for them, battled some injuries and all that stuff. So I don't know if that means they just don't have faith in him. They truly want to have a 2 running back system. Running back value aside, the Lions have Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, and Danny Amendola. Pretty well-defined roles for those receivers. TJ Hawkinson at tight end. And now Swift is a really good pass-catching running back. I do think that's a tough 5 to cover. So I like that from a what's Swift going to add to the team perspective. He was our top running back for whatever it's worth because of what he could do in the pass game.
Right. I mean, that's what he adds, right? He adds receiving threat to the backfield that didn't really have it. Kerryon Johnson is okay as a receiving running back, but I don't think he's not one of those ones that's causing problems for defenders, right? He's a capable receiving running back, but he's not a guy that you game plan for in that area. Yeah. It's just all right. If he catches a few, fine.
Catch the swing, catch the check down, right? And that's it. Yep.
So he was okay. Bo Scarborough is not doing anything in that area. So DeAndre Swift should legitimately change the way you have to think about the Detroit backfield in the passing game, which if you're going to do it is where it's valuable to do that in.
Quintez Cephas, a lot of people love him. He ran like 5.7 or something. He ran like a 4.7 at the combine, but he plays faster. He runs faster. Something happened there, right? So that's a worthwhile gamble in the 5th. And what'd you think of their 6th rounder? I mean, there's a guy in the 6th round, Sam, that can just who's the. I tried to get Chris at the cocktail hour. I was like, Chris, what about their 6th? Because I know he was like reading the Lions draft as we were talking about it. I was like, what about their 6th rounder, Chris? Give me him. It's
Johnny Utah.
Yeah, John Pennicini from Utah. Perfect 2 down, maybe 1 down, run stopping nose tackle. That's where you draft those guys at 197 overall in the draft. And once again, I think the value of drafting those run stoppers in the 6th or the 5th or wherever you can get them is you don't come back the next year and draft them in the 2nd. When that attractive A'Shawn Robinson type is there in the 2nd, you don't waste a second round pick on him. You got the guy previously in later rounds. They're usually there.
That shift in emphasis or naming, the shift in nomenclature from 2 down to 1 down is actually something we should be pushing, because two down players aren't 2 down players anymore. People play nickel 75% of the time. 2 down players are 1 down guys. You play them 25% of the downs. It's an obvious run situation only. You used to have these guys that would play, 250 snaps as pass rush specialists. They don't really exist anymore, because you need to be more than that to rush the passer. But run down specialists might exist now. The guys that play 250 snaps in the season on obvious rundowns, and outside of that, you're a liability.
Yep, absolutely. 1 down player, John Pennicini. So good, solid draft all around for the Lions. May have gotten a couple mid-round starters, some impact players at the top. So running back just a little bit too high for us. Chicago Bears, we gave them a B+. I didn't like their first pick. I always say we, but I think we're very much in agreement on a lot of these things. They've got a couple projectable players on day 3. Jaylen Johnson, their second round corner, we had as a first round value. So that was their best pick. He could step right in and play. Cole Kmet at 43 overall, a tight end who he was an unexciting watch. He was one of those guys, I'm watching him, I'm like, I don't get it. He looks slow. And I try to watch a guy first and then check the measurables. And all of his combine stuff made him look athletic. I just didn't see it on the field. I didn't think he looked fast or anything like that. But he was one of those true classic inline tight ends that this draft didn't really have a whole lot of. And the Bears, in their 9 tight end room, felt like they needed one more in Kmet.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of like it's a massive amplification of the idea that, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have any. The Bears have 9 tight ends, consequently have none.
9.
But the problem is, it's a bad draft for tight ends. It was a bad free agency period for tight ends. It's a bad year. It's a bad offseason to need tight end help. And we speculated before the draft, was that going to cause some of these guys to get pushed up higher than they should otherwise, because the supply isn't there. So if you need one, you got to take him early. And I think that's basically what you see here is you get a guy that's not that good a prospect, but is pushed high by the fact that there just isn't a great supply of good tight ends this year. And apparently a team like the Bears decided they really needed one.
There's a couple things that fascinate me about that, though, Sam, right? We don't look at their wide receiver core and think that they're great. We look at their offensive line and say they were really good in 2018. They all seem to regress last year. So I don't know that you have to attack offensive line, but I look at that receiving core. What made them feel like we need a tight end? They invested in Jimmy Graham. Like, what's going through the process of team building here? Like, how are we going to get the most out of Nick Foles or Mitch Trubisky? Is it by having Cole Kmet, like a true wide tight end, plus a Jimmy Graham and whatever else sticks there? And they feel good about their receivers, as in second round pick Anthony Miller heading into year 3, 7th round pick Javon Wims heading into year 3. Last year's 4th rounder, Riley Ridley. Like, do they feel all those guys are just going to step forward? They feel good about receiver. They feel good about enough at tackle. And they felt really strongly, hey, we need to top off this offense with like an old school tight end. That interests me as far as the thought process goes.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same as the Browns, where it's like they needed to get a tight end this offseason in order to make a fundamental shift in personnel that they want to make for that offense, right? They've changed offensive scheme. So they want to pivot from 11 personnel to 12 personnel or to 22 personnel, 2 tight ends anyway. So they needed to get a tight end they could trust being on the field, 70% of the time. They didn't have one. So they had to overpay for a guy like Austin Hooper to make it happen. I wonder if the same thing is true for the Bears, although they didn't change scheme, right? Maybe they want to pivot. Maybe this is a team that wants to attack with 2 tight end personnel groups more than they did a year ago. And in order to make that happen, obviously you need to add an extra tight end from somewhere. So that's the only thing I can think of that would make you want to aggressively pursue a tight end to this degree, to the point where it, changes your value on certain other things.
So just to finish Kmet, I don't think he does anything special. Big dude, looks like a blocker. He's okay there. He's not that dynamic. He's not, I don't think he's got pretty good body control and good size. Okay. So that's that. I think Jaylen Johnson steps in, has a chance to start over Artie Burns, who's slotted in to start right now. Jaylen could be a really good player. Beyond that, Darnell Mooney is the guy to keep an eye on. We talked about they didn't really attack wide receiver, but that dude adds 4.3 speed. He's not terribly polished, but when you just watch him, dynamic after the catch with that speed, high points the ball, gets the ball at the catch point. Kendall Vildor from Georgia Southern, solid as well. A lot of people love Travis Gibson, the edge. I mean, they've got a lot of interesting third day type of guys. I just think they could have done a lot more with that 43rd overall pick. So solid draft with a B+ in our system. The Minnesota Vikings. I know you'll have a lot to say on the Vikings generally, but here's my overarching take with the Vikings. Every team in the NFL has to rebuild. They hit the salary cap, they hit some limits and all that stuff. And I think the Vikings have played this unbelievably, right? You've got Kirk Cousins, which is like you're sitting in the middle of we're going for it and we're rebuilding. That's what Kirk Cousins is as a quarterback. He could be both. He could be a rebuild guy and he could be a go for it guy. They pushed that roster to as far as they could without a lot of depth and up against the salary cap. And they've completely replenished the roster. This happens in the NFL a lot. I think it's uncomfortable for fan bases because you see big names that you're used to leave and you see new names come in. But when you bring in new names in volume, as in 15 draft picks, like you're going to get 5 or 6 or 7 contributors here. Starting wide receiver in Justin Jefferson, maybe 2 starting corners in Jeff Gladney and Cameron Dantzler, maybe a starting tackle in Ezra Cleveland, Troy Dye at linebacker who's going to contribute, and then who knows what else. 2 or 3 other guys that are going to contribute. This is a great job by the Vikings rebuilding on the fly and doing it while still having some core pieces remaining. My take.
Yeah. I think you have to separate the strategy of the strategy of roster management with the situation the Vikings were therefore presented with come the draft time, right? I think the strategy to put yourself in the position of needing to come up with at least 2, probably 3 starters coming out of the draft it's just bad roster maintenance, right? It's not a good position to be in because we've always talked about the strike rate in draft picks is bad, right?
Right.
So the only way of like guaranteeing that would be, all right, I need a tackle or I need a wide receiver and I need a cornerback. The only way of guaranteeing that is to be right. I'm going to draft 4 wide receivers and 4 cornerbacks. It's the only way I can be sure of one of those guys, being the guy based off the average strike rate of everybody's draft. So needing like 3 guys to come in and start, I just think is putting yourself in a tough spot. That being said, the Vikings rolled into this draft, and given the situation they were in, I think they did about as well as you could possibly expect them to. They get a wide receiver who should be able to come in and replace what they left in Stephon Diggs, or at least fits that role, does that, a lot of the same scheme stuff. That's a nice pick. They get Jeff Gladney, who should be able to come in and start for them at cornerback. Really nice schematic fit as well. And they were able to trade down and make that pick happen. So that's like an absolute jackpot. Ezra Cleveland in the 2nd round could potentially start from day 1. Cameron Dantzler in the 3rd, I think, is potentially an absolute steal. Fell because of a combination of being built like a twig and then running like a 4.7 once he tried to bulk up and prove he wasn't built like a twig. So but I think if you go back and just watch his tape, just forget the measurable stuff, go back and watch him play, he handled Jamar Chase about as well as anybody did in college football. And that's the best receiver in college football. His tape over multiple years is really good. He should come in and contribute. And then after that, they just started throwing darts. And I think I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm saying that's a positive, right? They hit the pieces they expect to contribute right away. And at that point on, you're just throwing darts and hoping you hit something.
They got a really nice blend of athletes, like a DJ Wanham's an athlete on the defensive line, and then Kenny Willekes, even though he posted a video of him being really athletic, isn't known for his athleticism. He's a really good potential run-stopping defensive end, right? Same thing with Blake Brandel going in the 6th round. He was just crazy productive for us at Oregon State at tackle. The grades were awesome. He just doesn't move well. So it's a nice blend of here's these guys that performed well. Here are these guys that maybe didn't perform well but have really good athleticism. So I like it. I like the Vikings draft. In part because, when you bring in 15 players, there's going to be a lot of players that you like. And if you go into every draft saying, we need to get X number of players to come out of it, sometimes teams need more. But generally, like if you get 3 or 4 good player contributors out of each draft, you're doing a pretty good job. If you draft 15 times, you have a much better hit rate doesn't have to be as good. So
yeah, the other sort of problem with that way of thinking is the number of guys you have that contribute, if you use that term, is entirely dependent on how crappy the roster is in front of them, right?
Yeah,
it's like, oh, I got 5 contributors from this draft because the 5 positions they played in were absolute barren wastelands in terms of veterans, right? So you can essentially manufacture yourself a ton of day one contributors if your roster is wretched. So that, I don't think, is a great way of measuring it. How many of these guys contribute in a meaningful, positive way is going to be what determines whether they nail this or not, which is true for everybody, right?
Reminds me of the 2008 San Francisco Giants, Sam. You remember that?
Of course it does.
They called up every one of my teammates, guys that never, ever should have been in the big leagues, and I got hurt. I was on my way to the show, man. Giants were like the worst team in baseball. They called everybody up, and I got hurt. Missed my shot. Everybody got to be a big leaguer that year, except me. Anyway, we gave the Vikings an A. And, yeah, congrats, Vikings. Really nice job. No, I thought it was a good job. Green Bay Packers. We've talked about this. We're not going to spend
worst draft in the league. Simple.
We gave him a D.
Yeah.
It's not even a wait and see. I think there's there's two things from a process standpoint that we would disagree with. One, they went quarterback in the first. Fine.
Traded up to do it.
They traded up to go get Jordan Love, who we think is a massive projection. And then 2, I think they're completely revamping their team to take the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hands to build a run-first team with a 250-pound running back and an H-back with picks 2 and 3.
Yeah.
So that's that on the Packers draft. Didn't like it.
If you're actually interested in more, post-mortem, the previous, our winners and losers covered it extensively, but we don't need to rehash it in this one. They lost bad.
Not going to rehash it. There we go. Packers, we didn't like it. Go check out our winners and losers podcast, and that'll give you some answers on what we thought of that draft.
You want to get rid of me and get back to more great PFF YouTube content? All you have to do is push that button right there and subscribe. Thanks for watching.